But what knowledge, what critical knowledge do you need to flow? And do you need to connect people to people, or do you need to connect people to information so they can do critical thinking and make some decisions? So the knowledge flow cycle is a very important process to think about and to move through, because it helps you create value. When, as I just said, an Excel spreadsheet doesn't create value. Someone interpreting it and saying, here's the solution, creates value. So I think the real big bang in this whole cycle, we spend so much time investing in huge infrastructures that help us collect lessons learned and best practices and help us connect people so that they can share what they know. What we're not paying attention to as leaders in this field is how it gets used. And when it gets used is when you get those senior leaders engaged, because they can see the value. They can see that there's not mistakes being created over and over again. There's improvement in the way it works. You can do, someone said, less with less, which is the world we're living in, but it allows you to think through and really understand how your knowledge is going to impact. And the realization is this: not all of your knowledge may need to flow like some of it. And you may realize that it's really more about your tacit knowledge than your explicit knowledge that's sitting in the database. And the reality is you have to have both, and that's where you rely heavily on your IT partners and your content management partners to make it happen. So an example of a business case, let me make it real for you. You got to have a couple of dynamics. It's kind of the tale of two cities. Your employees are going to need a case for action that promotes the end of flow. So access. It's got to be visible. There's got to be reciprocity connected to it. They want what they know, what they need when they need it, and they want it just in the format that they want it. And everybody thought that a good search tool was going to get you there, and it's not. It's a factor, but it's not going to do that. What we also find is that employees want to see advancement in their careers, their job roles, their profession, and that's the value proposition for them. So that's one of your audiences that you're making the case for action for. The second audience is the organization and your leaders. And that looks like cost reductions. It looks like being able to, time to deployment, being able to deploy doctrine quickly, and making sure that what's being trained is the same thing that's actually happening in the field. And then you can have a very fast pipeline from what happens in the field back to your doctrine so that it's agile and it can get trained and start people out on the right track. So you're going to have to think about, again, 2 points of this business case. And this is an example of ConocoPhillips. When they actually bring a network together, they articulate the facts of what needs to happen when I'm thinking about my knowledge flow. So one of the big drivers is the case for action. We're seeing that it gets a lot of engagement, and the business leader usually can see the expansion and the possibilities once they've seen the tangible evidence of what's going on. Then you have to prove out this business case. There's an execution factor in it to make it prove out. Now, and whether you are in our levels of maturity, at low, more ad hoc, localized knowledge sharing, or you've already moved up to that standardized, being very proactive, you will always need a business case for points in time. As you get past level 3, here's the other thing that we found that you need as part of that business case. It's a vision. Now, people get really crazy when you start saying, let's create a vision for our knowledge management network, because the organization has a mission, a vision. It's what we're setting out to do. How does knowledge management enable that? And what does that look like for our organization? What happens with the vision, if you do it too early on, at those lower levels of maturity, nobody believes you, because you don't have the proof of concept, people don't understand it. But at level 3 and above, if you don't have it, very large, complex organizations like the Army lose their way. And people start doing random things that don't tie back into a concrete vision and mission for them. The other thing I always say about vision is the smartest people in the organization can see it, because it gets branded and promoted high up. So you'll need a vision at that level 3 or above as part of your case for action to keep this moving forward. All right, number two drivers. Measurement. God, we've been trying to measure this thing. We've gone through the stories. We've gone through capturing data, volumes of data, sitting and looking at it and saying, do I really care how many communities of practice I have? I have 125. Woo! Good going. Some people are like, oh, didn't senior leaders see that? And they go, we've got 125 communities of practice and people are spending 10% of their time in these communities. My gosh, how much money is that costing us? We can't do that. We've seen programs come and go with that. So, what we picked up on about 6 or 7 years, well, actually 2003, we did some, well, the time was real groundbreaking research, and we had looked at a lot of the experts in the field. And so let's take all the knowledge that's going, or the work that's being done around calculating the value of knowledge and intellectual capital. Let's take it to the practitioner, people in organizations, to say, what is it that you're really needing to show for your organization? How do you do that? What came out of that was a very simple concept that we call value path. And once you start thinking about how your knowledge management activities, like lessons learned, like best practice sharing, communities or networks, when you start thinking about what that does and how it impacts the in-the-flow day-to-day business, and how, with that improvement of the in-the-flow day-to-day business, impacts those massive outcomes that you're looking for. In the Navy, it's carrier, for Carrier Team 1, it's carrier availability, readiness. So whatever it is that you're looking for, it's important to be able to trace the path of that knowledge management effort. And I'm just talking about all the way, if I can read, this is from U.S. Navy Carrier Team 1. If I can start back here at participation. So when people say, I'm putting up a community of practice, here's a standard way of doing it, don't recreate the wheel. And also start measuring, figure out what your consistent measure is and what you're trying to look at. Because if they're going to participate and show up, you need to be counting that right now. People, why are we counting it? Because if you don't have data, it's very hard to produce tangible calculations. So start out with your participation, understand the key activities of participating in a knowledge-sharing network, as the Navy does, and then understand how those activities start impacting your business processes. And you will start seeing the value path. Now again, I told you this got a lot of attention because, number one, it brought the stakeholders. Because the only thing, quote, knowledge management about all of this is the participation in the community of practice. Now granted, they got to have the structure, a community of practice structure, and they have to have tools to enable that, portals. They focus on lessons learned and best practices. But this is the only thing KM about it. Everything else is tied to business knowledge and business activity. So it helps you really start thinking about that path that's going to get you results and what you're looking for. So this is what you can produce out of this. Let me show you some cool data, and I'll give you two examples. One is that you're able to start correlating participation to business outcomes. And that's important because you can say to your leader, your business leader, that as a result of 85% participation in some knowledge management activity, you are getting an impact to your business. They start paying attention to that participation. So they help you with the engagement. Somebody's nodding out there. The second thing is, when you look at these correlations, you then want to be able to correlate that activity that is impacted by participation to your outcomes. And this is live data, blinded, but it's live data that shows the correlations you see. Now, we're still in the early stages of being able to say this is for the entire enterprise. This is on project by project basis. If people had great data, we could do it. The formulas were there. But it's about you making the case, building on your business case with some very tangible evidence. And this can start from day one. It doesn't have to wait. You can start looking at the performance of your knowledge management activities and how they impact your business. So again, the second piece, as I said, an unintended benefit we got was the conversation that goes around this. Because that's what drives discussion when you start showing data. That's what drives discussion. Now, The other thing you need to pay attention to is the knowledge manager, and this is one other example. I'll let you build on this one more time, Tammy, just to show you the data, and this is showing, again, participation in a network that is around knowledge sharing for Common Code Fellows. And they call it grabbed, given, and gathered, which means that that's their best practices and content that they're looking at. It. Somebody grabbed it and used it, someone gave it, and then someone was responsible for making sense to it with the gathering. So they captured that data so they can tie it back to business results. The other important thing for as a knowledge manager, and this is for those of you who've been on this road for a while, we finally got the notion a couple of years ago to say, you know what, if we're a program and we perform certain activities, and by the way, the best knowledge management programs that we see are not heavily resourced. 4 people are typically what we see in your knowledge management program. Now, it's a hub and spoke model because they rely on their IT partners, they rely on their HR partners, their communication, and so they're part of an overall system that has to work together. But the actual resource commitment, when you start talking about investment, does not have to be 120 people. Even if IBM has 4 people in their global core team for knowledge management. So, what's important, the reason you need to think about above the flow measures is because that's actually your program. And these measures actually show that your activities that people use are performing well, that we can stand up a community of practice in less than 2 days where it used to take us 3 months. That we can share and transfer best practices, and here's how we know the process is working, because we can calculate the percentage of shares versus the percentage of uses and what that means to the business. We can do the correlations. So there's a set of management measures that are required for your above-the-flow activities that just keep your system running. So all those portal hits that you're collecting right now, pay attention to. How do they impact? What's the value add of those portal usage? And how does it impact business? And think about now how that's performing. Unique users are important. Contributive contributions are important. So these all have great meaning, and don't spend a lot of time thinking about measures for knowledge management. APQC has them on. You can go to our website and get them. Those are out there. It's what you do with them and how you use them. This is from our friends at Rockwell Collins, their KM program. You can see that they look at several layers on their knowledge management scorecard for their program, and this is primarily in their engineering discipline right now. They're rolling out to the enterprise. But when you look at their programs, their knowledge management team, and it is, I think, 4 people, if I'm not mistaken. They're responsible for a number of programs that impact the business. They're responsible for learning. Building competencies is a core part of their KM strategy. And they're responsible for getting people connected and letting them share. And these are all measures that they track, and they're correlating and tying back to the business value. Because it's what gets people's attention and what gets them investment for each year, budget for each year. So, measurement, again, is one of those things where people think that you can't do it, just like this picture, but you really can. All right, so I found this. I just thought they were cute, quite honestly. When someone walks into your organization, you guys have been in improvement initiatives, right? Been through them, with them, leading them, in them. It kind of sometimes feels a little like schizophrenic, right? So what's the first thing you think of when somebody comes in and says, okay, we're going to do something new and we've got a great change management strategy for you. You're going to be part of our change management strategy. How do you feel? Makes you feel good. Don't you get excited and go, woo! Change management. One-time change management? Yeah. Everybody likes to have a change management plan, and the minute you say that, your audience goes running. They go underground. They get away. I do. It sounds like it hurts or something. So this thing called culture, how do you deal with it? I think that Our change mastery skills that we've had for years, some of us for years. I started when I was 12, so I've learned quickly. Thank you for not giggling. But, you know, we lose our change mastery skills when we start pulling in programs like this and wanting people to participate. And you got to get back to the basics about what people really need and want to help them understand and to help you understand what's important to the soldier, to the leader, and to people running this thing. So the third point I like, the third driver that I think is important, and this is real. I see some of you could be here. You got to make this stuff relevant. Now, I would have used the word fun, but fun is not a good word to put in on that picture. And when I say fun, I don't mean frivolous fun. I'm saying interesting, rewarding, it's in the flow. We really understand what people are doing with. ABUC created a great scenario planning tool. We use the whole thing we learned from scenario planning. You know, you guys do that a lot. In fact, Captain Ralph Soul, who just retired from the U.S. Navy, helped us create that template. And it's getting you in that first person of what are you dealing with? What does your flow look like? And how are the tools and approaches and systems I'm building going to really impact that flow? Because, guys, they can't climb out of their flow to go do something called knowledge management or even be in a community of practice. So this is where you've got to spend some time thinking about how your activities are really impacting what your audience is saying. And, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do. You got to keep it fresh and you got to keep it new. And that's where, as I said, all the Web 2.0 tools and all the social media. Because, you know, there's a notion that training is important for everything we do. And you know what? It darn well is. But there's training can be done in such a variety of ways these days. It can be still the butts and seats, excuse my language. But it can be that, and it's important because you're building a base of knowledge. But there's also that informal learning that takes place on the job at someone's teachable moment. And when you build your knowledge management structures around those things, Federal Reserve Bank has something they call collaborama. But it's very focused on the things that their examiners need to know to come together and collaborate. And they market it as being the place where the smartest people come and where you're going to be the best responsible. So top 10 lists, things that are quick and that's the quick and to the point that allow people to learn at their teachable moment so that if you've given them those basic skills and training about how to think critically and how to evaluate and how to look at data, if you've given them that, you're KM layers on top of that to help that tacit knowledge flow. One of the best examples we think we've seen, Joe, is from the Center for Army Lessons Learned. Because there's a lot of relevancy of what's happening, and this is a labor of love. This has been going on forever. We first called after action reviews and lessons learned well over a dozen years ago from the Army. And people in industry have taken it like a wildfire and saying this is how it's done. But the example is when you make it relevant and you put it into people's flow, it will help you engage and get people to participate. So 3 things. That's the exciting thing. All those capabilities, and I'm not saying you don't need all of the others, but if you'll focus on the 3 things that I've talked about, the business case, the case for action, the value proposition, and making it tangible, the measures help support that from day one, and the change mastery that's required. Those are the things that drive the program. And again, I'll tell you, we thought it was governance. We thought senior leaders, but I have a lot of organizations that have taken that capability assessment that have level 5 mature governance, level 4 mature budgets, and they are way down at 1s and 2s when it comes to knowledge sharing. So they're required, and they help you in a very complex system, but these are the 3 things that drive. So with some final thoughts, and I know we're going to have some time for Q&A after this, let me leave you with 3 things. So your knowledge management program is going to demand a lot because you are servicing a very large audience in various forms of fashion. So think innovatively. You've always got to be out there on the edge, but very practical. The second thing is measure competency. Measure so that you understand what the impact is, but rely on the evidence of capability. You've got to pull those two together. And then finally, you're going to need a lot of stamina and persistence to get to the finish line. Thank you guys very much, and we'll take some questions.
We're now going to go ahead and open up the question and answer period for Cindy. Just a reminder, we're going to take questions here, and we're also going to take questions virtually.